Good morning. I wasn't saying good morning to them. I was saying good morning to you.
Oh, good morning. Never mind.
So there was a man. Talked to his neighbor who owned a farm. Okay? And he goes to his neighbor and he says, "Hey, neighbor, are you listening to this story?"
Yeah.
You don't look like it. "Hey, neighbor, you're a generous guy. If I asked you if you had 500 horses, would you give me 250? I said, "Yes, of course. You know I got your back. Thank you." "Hey, if you had 300 cows, would you give me 150 of them?" He said, "Yeah, if you needed them. What's mine is yours. Mi casa es su casa." And he said, "Well, if you have 2 pigs," and he says, "Stop right there. You know I have 2 pigs."
Wow.
That's a good illustration. We're all generous theoretically, but it's like, wait, now horses, because I don't have them, you can have them.
Yeah.
I thought, did I mess up the line or something?
No, that was good. The whole time I was thinking a lot of things. Right before we recorded, you asked me to host
to do the heavy
lifting. And I was thinking, well, what does that mean? And as I'm thinking about that, you come in pretty hot with a joke that you prepared beforehand. It didn't tell me you were going to start with. Secondly, I was thinking, am I listening to this? What's the payoff going to be? And then I thought, have I heard this? And then I was thinking about something that the middle schoolers said. And then by that point, you were talking about pigs, and it was funny.
Come on, man. You know I have pigs.
No, that's good. Yeah, we could use that as an illustration. Why didn't you share that yesterday? Time, probably.
Time was of
How
the
long
essence.
was yours?
You still have the record.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
I don't have the record.
Oh, Jay Stovall has the record.
I wasn't going to name drop him.
Yeah, that's true.
You didn't need to say his name.
Okay, let's put it this way. You have
For our regular teaching team.
You have more. Your average is higher.
Than yours?
Yes, for sure.
You think so? Yeah.
Actually, though, there's like 2 or 3 this past year that you made it like right at 30.
Yeah, you've gone longer too.
I have.
So we could get someone to.
I think in the practice series, I go longer than normal.
Yeah.
I've done like 6 months of study, so it's like, oh, you need to know this and you need to know that. And I know maybe this isn't the best. I know we only have 4 weeks. So I'm like, if I don't cover this now, I can't cover it next week.
Yeah.
Which this podcast helps with that, though.
It does? Yeah, I think you should start. Do you do this? Do you cut stuff from the teaching and then say, we'll do that in the podcast?
I do.
So
did you notice?
That's a part of hosting.
I did that, though, in the Vision Sunday. I put it on the very back page, because you see my sermon notes, about Dallas Willard on how to love people, and I put it there so that we talked about it, and I forgot to bring it up.
Gotcha. All right, well.
So there is one thing I put on my notes this week that we didn't cover. I covered in my prayer in the first service, but that's not on the YouTube. So we can cover that. But what was the other thing I was going to ask you or address? No, yeah, there's a lot we're trying to cover. Oh, yesterday, yes, I did go over. Do you want to guess?
I asked you how long it was. I'm going to guess. Wait, second service or first? Which one did you upload? Second?
Ooh, I uploaded the second, and the second was longer.
Yeah. I'm going to say 42.
41 and change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt like a 42 minutes sermon. As someone who's also preached a 42-minute sermon.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
No.
You said this is going to be a Caleb sermon.
I did.
Which I interpreted as long and boring.
Because what I could have done is take out like the Hebrew overview of money, but I thought that was helpful. So I kept thinking, like, worried about time. But then I thought, which part now do I take out? And then when you do the chart, like, you got to go through the whole chart and actually explain it well. The chart part was 12 minutes.
I had a thought of how you could have shortened that.
Wow.
But during the second time I was listening to it, but I don't.
How could I have shortened it?
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's any good, but I just think you could have, like, in my mind, there was a way where you could have done the chart and then done the case studies all in one thing. So it didn't feel as segmented, but it felt more of like one like solid movement. And then you go into and I actually liked it when I think it would have been, I get why you put it in the front. I think it worked out in the front too, but I also liked it when you had the James Bryan Smith, or James K. Smith.
Oh, you liked it when it was towards the end?
I liked it both. I see how it worked in the front end, but I thought if you wanted a more like punchy emotional ending, that would have been really good too.
Gotcha.
So it just depended on what you wanted. It's just a different version of that.
So
sermon.
I sent him a manuscript Thursday or even Wednesday.
Yeah.
And I changed it by Friday. That's what happens when I send it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But I was struggling with, I was trying to see the flow of thought.
Yeah.
I didn't like in my original intro, the War of the Worlds intro, and then my intro about Shutter Island. I'm like, I'm sharing too many stories. Let's just get to the point.
Yeah.
So when I removed that, I was like, this intro needs a little bit more weight. Like it needs a little bit more knowledge, which is why I brought James Bryan Smith there. So I actually wrestled with that with Jordan. I asked her Saturday night. She's just so supportive. She says, whatever you did is great. But I was like, hey, I'm reading like all of these in a row and then looking at the graph. What makes more, I guess what I asked her was, should I read one passage and then show how it correlates on the graph? And I was like, no, that's kind of like, to me, that was discombobulating. Too jarring, going back and forth. So I knew it had to be either the chart and then the scripture, or the scripture and then the chart. Well, my intro was so long, if I did the chart again, like we wouldn't have gone to scripture till halfway through the message. So that's why my decision was, let's just do an overview of the scriptures and then tie this together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sorry, you could have done it better.
That's not what I said at all. This is why we don't talk about this.
I know.
I was just about to say this is why we need like a teaching team. Like we talk all the time about how nice it is to be able to just do, like if we had the ability to just do this, just craft sermons and stuff, that'd be really fun. But also what we're doing is fun and I love it all. So
yeah, well, now that I know yesterday's sermon sucked, how about you read the overview that you wrote? Because it's just so much better.
Mine are wordy too.
They are. Oh, can I say that? Or if we're just criticizing each other?
That's not what's happening, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I noticed the group, yes, one of my groups, because the overview was so long, they just kind of like, I was like, look, so now what I do is I say, hey, read with me, like watch it, because I think you're able to compute it. Yeah. It's a wonderful way. Like if you really pay attention, it absolutely encapsulates the sermon. But sometimes they're just kind of.
It's because you do 6 months of prep that your sermons are so packed. I gotta.
Yeah, they're just
okay. I'll read it. This is when we're going to lose all of our viewers, is in the middle of this. Okay. Like all of our beliefs, the attitudes and dispositions we have towards money are largely shaped by our past, our family of origin, our cultural background, and our church experiences. In Luke's gospel, we see at least 4 different ways of viewing money. Like the rich fool in Luke 12, some of us believe that the good life is found when we hoard the most for ourselves. Others of us live more like the rich young ruler in Luke 18. We falsely assume that God will always bless us financially as a reward for our faithfulness. Or we doubt God's generosity towards us altogether and live more like the older brother in Luke 15. But in Luke 21, we see a picture of someone who really trusts in the God of abundance and not in the uncertainty of wealth. A widow giving all that she has is commended by Jesus as a picture of what true generosity looks like. We too can reshape how we view money and the way we give by reorienting our minds around the truths of Scripture, reshaping our habits to reflect generosity, and participating in a community of Jesus followers committed to doing the same.
So I should have called you and asked you about rearranging.
What? Putting that at the no, like I said, it was it worked well.
Like you said, it works either way.
It works either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun. Okay, great overview. You were gonna talk. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask how you felt about it. How'd you feel about it?
The overview?
No, the sermon, the teaching.
I thought it was great until you gave your critique.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
No, I was excited about it. I'm passionate about that topic. I think just the nature of trying to keep, in a portable church setting too, trying to keep sermons a little bit shorter and to help with volunteers. And plus it was Story Sunday. So it was like one of those Sundays where it was just packed because we had growth track after. So I think if anything, I would have liked to slow down a little bit in some of those moments, but I didn't know what to leave out. So I felt good about it. I especially felt good about it because of the conversations that I had with people directly after. So forget you. Okay. I hope people know our humor here.
This is like a normal.
Yeah. What if people think there's actual tension?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So of the 4, which one do you lean towards the most?
Poverty. Yeah, I think
Copycat.
Well, for different reasons.
Do you think though it's kind of we were both influenced by a lot of the same like preachers growing up? Like, don't you think like that movement
I think that's
was kind of leaned towards that way?
yeah, I think it's that combined with two character traits that I think I have that you probably have similar, but I think that these are more characteristic of me are my ruthless judgmentalism, which is like
kind of like what I said, like when I see somebody with material wealth, like the first thought was you probably
who did you screw over to get that
Gotcha.
or whatever, which I've been open about, and I think people know. I don't need to be open. You know that people know that about me. I think that's a part of my shadow side. But I think there's a general distrust that I have towards people with money. It's that. And so when I read like Crazy Love and Radical, those books kind of tapped into that part of me where I was like, which I guess for context, I don't know, we don't need to give summaries of those books, but they were very much about like, a lot of us are basically what you'd said, like we're holding on to things that maybe God is asking us to give away. And what we find in return, when we give those things away, is an impact in the kingdom that we never even would have imagined, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so those were really foundational for me because it made me rethink. And in a lot of ways, me reading those books got me into formation because those made me ask like, well, if salvation is by grace alone, it doesn't matter what I do. Why do I need to give up my TV or give more or whatever? So then I was wrestling with that. Anyways, that's one part of it.
I would say, because I know I went to one of my professors at CBU was David Platt's mentor. So like it's definitely, he is, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. So this professor though, what I finally realized, and maybe we said this on the podcast a long time ago, but what I finally realized is his job was just to confront you and make you ask the hard questions. So I remember reading Radical and I did feel bad that I had a 27-inch TV in my dorm room. But I eventually moved on from that. But it was a good like asking the hard questions, not just assuming, is it okay that I have these possessions? And I was able to come at the end of it and go, oh no, that 27-inch TV isn't evil. However, how am I hoarding? How am I, but people take Jesus's teachings and go poverty or they go prosperity. So there has to be a lot of wisdom and a lot of nuance.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it, is that the purpose those books served was to get you to ask and confront things that you maybe wouldn't have confronted, which I guess in a lot of ways is kind of what we're trying to do in this series as well. But I also have this weird, just self-condemnation where I just don't think I deserve good things, that kind of thing. So that comes in.
I will say though, maybe this sounds bad, but the moment, maybe this is bad, but the moments I feel such deep gratitude and joy is when somebody gives me a gift. Like when somebody, and when I give other people a gift, let me be clear there. But like my Disney World example of just people, God blessing that. I feel so guilty, but also so grateful at the same time. It's so hard to explain that you can experience both of those emotions.
It's like,
simultaneously.
You're a words of affirmation person. So when I am too. So words of affirmation mean a lot to me. But at the same time, it's like that means a lot and I receive it, but almost equal in measure is my imposter syndrome comes up. And I think that's kind of at play here. So if I'm blessed financially or whatever, if someone gives me a gift, I'm super grateful and that means a lot. But also it's like, well, you don't deserve it. The imposter syndrome kind of comes up. But yeah, I would align probably the most with poverty gospel.
What are some of the... So the biggest fear I had is just being misunderstood with explaining things like the prosperity gospel. So what would you say, let's be fair to begin, is there anything positive within those who lean towards prosperity gospel? Notice this is me hosting and asking all the questions. And anyways, so we argued, and I think this is a fair assumption. That was my last jab. I could see that changed the room.
I just got a text, but
fine. So did I. I need to tell you what it said, but we'll do it later. We said the argument was, okay, in the prosperity gospel category, in this graph that, hey, let me pop it up right here. Okay, it's not as a full version, but there it is. Good luck zooming in. Is prosperity gospel is where you have an abundance mentality. So I would argue in that, because it's not tied to, it's like wishful thinking. Like things are going to be great, but also depending on stuff. Ultimately, you can't, people in the prosperity gospel can never, they're so attached to things. But so I want you to nuance that maybe a little bit more. Because again, I think I should have, the sermon was so bad. I should have had more time to explain. I'm now sounding insecure, so I'll stop. We all are insecure, but anyways, it's being distracting. So, but what is a positive side of it? because I have listened to people that are maybe of that, not even, I don't know. There's like hardcore prosperity gospel that I'm just like, I won't even give you a moment of my time. But some people that are like descendants of it, I'm like, well, sometimes when I'm around them, my faith is stirred.
Yeah. I think, this is tough because I think you put it well.
Or Wikipedia put it well.
It's the insistent, because at the foundation of the prosperity gospel, what makes the prosperity gospel versus like you just trusting in God's abundant providence is the reliance on the stuff and not God. So like I love like Mike and Grace's story, for example. Their takeaway wasn't that God is always going to provide. Like even in their story, they shared like it wasn't overnight. It wasn't like we gave once and God fixed all of our financial troubles. What they learned was that God gives good gifts to his children. God will provide for you. God is trustworthy. You can trust him to meet your needs. And so I think the good side of the prosperity gospel is that it trains you to approach God as a father, where you ask God for things that you need. Of course, James, you have not because you ask not. But then he also says, and you ask not because you
various passions.
Yeah, you have
waging war
inside of you. So the reason that we ask for some things sometimes is so warped and misconstrued that God isn't going to give us those things because we want them for the wrong reasons or whatever.
Yeah, like the other son who got the gift too early and squandered it.
Yeah,
right. That's a good example.
I think that if your prosperity gospel drives you to like only be grateful to God when he gives you stuff, then it's prosperity gospel.
And only to give in order to get back tenfold is
Right.
prosperity gospel. Like I said in the podcast last week, I've never thought I am giving so that I can increase my income. That is not a thought.
Right.
I am giving to get rid of greed. So that's the selfish part. That's the self-serving part. I don't want greed to take over my life and poison me. But also more than that, I want to bless. This is the Lord's, so I want to honor that. And I want missions to go. I want the church to still, the lights to turn on. You know, like there's different motivating factors. Once you say prosperity gospel, the motivating factor is I'm doing this so that I get rich.
It's self-centered. It's self-focused. It's all so that God can bless me. I can unlock my potential and I can live into my own purpose that God has for me, my dreams, my visions, that kind of thing.
And Comer says that the soft prosperity gospel that's more popular today is not as much the seed, like you will tenfold your income, but it is that prosperity gospel of self-esteem, of your own career success. And again, like I'd love for people to have a good self-esteem.
Yeah.
If your career is very successful and fruitful, awesome. But like when you go to those types of environments, it sounds like that's the driving force
Right.
behind everything.
I think the other thing you have to think of when you talk about the prosperity gospel is outside of the Western world, what happens when people are like, because I'm thinking of, like a Christian refugee who loses all of their possessions and they're praying desperately for God to, give them providence and things like that. Like the sad reality is like good, faithful, God honoring followers of Jesus die unjustly all the time.
Right.
So the promise that God is all to call
including
it like
almost all the apostles.
Exactly. Yeah. To say that God always blesses you financially or God is always going to take care of your needs. I even want to be careful when I say that because
Psalm 23, I have what I need.
Right. So like what we need, it depends on how you define need.
And that's what was really helpful for me in the Dallas Willard book, Life Without Lack, because it confronted me because of my poverty gospel tendencies. He was saying, no, God will supply all your needs. And it's like, is that true? Like it is hard to wrestle with.
Yeah. What I'm saying though is like, I'm not saying that that's not always true, but again, it depends on how you define need. Cause like,
and that's what's hard. Sorry to keep cutting you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say like and this is of course,
it's all relative.
My personal, personality coming out, like my judgmentalism a little bit, but like the kids, dying kid in India or whatever, like God didn't provide his needs. So that happened, kids dying from cancer, the single mom who just got bombed or whatever, like God didn't provide their needs as we would define needs. So what is the need?
Right.
And that's where I think prosperity gospel points you to the dependence on stuff and not on like to live as Christ, to die as gain. Like that's the secret of contentment that Paul finds. And that's what allows him to say like, even if I die, God isn't meeting my physical needs maybe, but I have faith that after this life is a new life and I'll be with God. And that's prosperity to me. So
Yeah.
it depends on how you define it. And it's all subjective, and we're in the West, and
Yeah, and I would say I actually was talking to a member of our church, and I thought he had a really cool realization. He said, I know ultimately if stuff hits the fan and we start losing things, I know the church has our back. Not in a way to take advantage of the church,
Right,
but also
yeah.
like I have what I need because I have a community that will make sure I won't fall. So that's such a great, and if you knew this person's generous, he's helping more people than people are helping him. But he knows that the kingdom economy,
Yeah.
and like what a great confidence that like, hey, I'm a part of this church family. I will be taken care of.
yeah,
Now you go to Paul where he says, hey, to the lazy person,
Yeah.
like you're worse than an unbeliever because
Yeah.
you're not taking care of your family and living lazy. So we actually have to go through a process when somebody, is in need, like there's all sorts of things. Are you budgeting? Are you,
there's a form you fill out.
yeah. Like I'm not going to help pay your Lamborghini,
Sure, right. Yeah.
So, this whole concept is just everything with money is very complex.
Yeah.
But I think we can I'm fearful of oversimplifying, but also I'm fearful of making it too complex. We can just explain ourselves out of just the obedience of giving to the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the obedience is asking God, because that is a command of Jesus too. Like in Matthew 6, when he teaches the disciples how to pray, it's reorienting their trust away from, because remember, and you explained this well, at the time they thought God favors me if he blesses me financially. And he's redirecting their trust away from the blessings of God into the giver, who's God himself. So that is, so asking God for things in faith that he's going to provide for you. And even if he doesn't, right? God, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if God doesn't give us what we need, which is salvation from this fire, he's still good and we're not going to bend the knee.
Which I think it goes back to those 3 stages of faith that we set out several times this year. Because I think in the stage 1 faith, the infant, we called it reap, it is more of a formula. And I do think God in his grace, sometimes when you start to give, it does, you'll see that immediate correlation.
Yeah.
Like I love that story of Mike and Grace. Like, hey, on Sunday I gave $5 and the next Monday I got $800 I didn't think was coming.
Yeah.
And I think the Lord in his provision does that. But I think as he grows us, he doesn't give us those obvious signs anymore because he's maturing us, not for us to trust in the stuff, is to trust in the Lord. And that applies in every area of spiritual formation. He is weaning us off of the milk and giving us solid food. So I want us to make sure as we're sharing stories, we're sharing those initial stories, because that's, I think, the biggest obstacle for people is to start. So I think there's so much good by saying, here's the story of this person starting. But also, I heard a sermon this morning. I was reading or listening on my run, and they were talking about their story of faith. This pastor, decided in his heart to give $20,000 to his building campaign, and then that left him with nothing. And then all of a sudden, medical debt the rest of that year. Child had to go to a different school with double the tuition, and they had to survive off of church people's generosity, like, hey, I'll help cover his tuition. Hey, I'll help with this medical expense. And so he's like, it was really humbling, but he's like, I would do it again because it taught me humility. It taught me to lean on the family of God. I still don't regret giving that. To me, that's a more mature story of saying it's not going to, in fact, sometimes your life's got to get harder.
Yeah. Which is in line with how Paul ended his life. Presumably he went from, for the level that he was at before he decided to follow Jesus, within his Jewish, rabbi, he was he was really high up. So he was presumably maybe not wealthy, but he had, stability and things like that.
Right.
And he ends his life, in prison and ultimately being executed for his faith in Jesus. So it is a lie to say that your life will always get better. But I think there is a correlation between generosity and contentment. So
right.
You give, and like you're saying initially, I think God does sometimes reward your faithfulness. You give him
with more stuff,
and he gives you more stuff. I think sometimes
my
that
camera's
happens.
off. Keep going.
So is it just on me?
It's just you.
All right. But I think over time, the more generous you are, the more okay you are with less stuff. The more content you are with, getting less. And so you give more, God sometimes blesses you with more, but then as you give more, you start to be just more satisfied and more content with what God is giving you. And then if you're following generosity well, I think the end result isn't you getting more stuff. It's you increasing your trust and your contentment in God alone, who's the one giving you that stuff. And then that just frees you up to be more generous with the stuff that God gives you, because you're not satisfied with that stuff. You're satisfied with God. And then I also think about the early church too, as you're mentioning. Am I supposed to ignore you right now? Oh, yeah. Or am I supposed to look at the camera? Yeah, the communal aspect of like at one point in your life, you can find yourself sort of in the wealthiest 1% of your local church. And then the next week even could be in the bottom, 99% or whatever. And so like the early church, one of the biggest obstacles they had to face, and I think when you see it functioning healthily, the most healthily, is when the wealthy people and the slaves are all in one congregation serving each other. So there's a natural breaking down of like a social hierarchy that's associated with your wealth when you come into the local church. And you see that really clearly in Acts 2, when they said everyone shared everything in common. Like the assumption that we make is, oh, they were all like us, like we're all kind of in the same area, things like that. But the more you read about
so much discrepancy
between who's involved and who's, they were ridiculed. The early church was ridiculed because of how open they were to and how welcoming they were to slaves, women, and children, which were like the lowest social class of that time. Those people are at the same table as the wealthy people coming in. So like that generosity sustains the church because it breaks down those hierarchies.
And with that idea of maturity, I do want us to talk about how I think giving should always be hard. So we're thinking about, because I think these next 2 weeks, Lord willing, will be a little more practical because we're still just trying to get to the heart of the issue. But with giving, I think there's people, I think it depends on economic bracket, honestly, and also maturity levels. You grow, but like I know some people are in financial conditions where tithing will always just be a sacrifice. It's always hard. We can't do this, we can't do that because we're giving first. But also some people, Lord willing, it's a great situation. They get to the point where tithing. Richard Foster has a great line. He says, there is a world. He goes, this is why he thinks tithing is old covenant, and he thinks it's a starting point, not a stopping point. It's because it is still possible, especially in our day, to give 10% and still be a slave to mammon. And so I think what I love about the kingdom life is there's always room to grow, and I think there's always a growth edge for giving. I don't know if I'm pivoting the conversation too much, but I wanted to make sure we talked about that.
A few thoughts. I think that there, especially those of us who are financially blessed, that we could tithe, give our 10% and not even notice it. Like it doesn't have any effect on our hearts or our souls. And I think that's what you're saying with the mammon. You could still be enslaved to it. But I also wonder, so we talk a lot about, and maybe this is a different category, and this isn't a pushback on that, but I'm curious how these two things would mingle. We talk a lot about upstream versus downstream practices. So like the downstream practices are the ones that come naturally to you and that you enjoy. So like there's a point where reading scripture for some people is just not hard. They love it. They could spend hours, all different types, study, memorization, meditation, all those things. And it's just a joy. But maybe something like community is really hard. What about people who does that apply to generosity, or is generosity a different practice? Because you're saying it should always be challenging, which I think I agree with. But what would you say to somebody who's like, it's honestly not a challenge? Like I would consider it a downstream practice. I give above and beyond already. It's sacrificial.
Okay. I think it's a good paradigm. First of all, I do think like when the scriptures, it talks about generosity being a gift of the Spirit. So I would say those people, it's easy. It's like, this is just what I do. It's just kind of a gift, and I love to give. So I do think there's a world for that. I will say to the person who hasn't, I guess the reason I said that was it's very possible to get very comfortable with 10% and actually still be serving mammon. But you'd never notice it, because this is what the Pharisees did. The Pharisees were like, I give 10%, so I'm not even going to think about my greed. I don't have greed. And it's like, Jesus was like, no, you actually have a lot of it. So I guess that's what I meant to, that's what I'm meaning. Like there's a way to give and like comfortably be like, yeah, I'm giving more than anybody, and still be entrapped. So that's why I guess I wanted to say it should always have a level of sacrifice. Like you see in 2 Corinthians 8:9, the church in Macedonia, they give out of their poverty. So meaning they sacrificially give, they change their lifestyle in order to bless a whole nother church that they don't even get to see. So you just see this correlation between giving and sacrificing. God gave his one and only son. How was he given? Through the sacrifice of his own life. So I just think there's a total correlation between generosity and sacrificing. At the same time, a lot of us have joy sacrificing. So I think if you're really at a great spot, it's like, yeah, I'm sacrificing my time, my talents, my treasure, and it's a joy because I know it's more blessed to give than to receive. I would just say it's really healthy to know there's always when it comes to generosity, there's always some sort of area where I can grow. Mm-hmm. It's not you're not marking off tallies. I don't have to think about that anymore.
That makes sense. Yeah. There's always, I think there should always be sacrifice involved with generosity. Like you should feel yourself losing something. Kinda. Like there's
and to push back, like I don't want a poverty gospel where it's like following Jesus always is the worst, like there's a joy to that. So,
but again, I think it's about replacing your joy away from the stuff and towards God and whatever he satisfies you with. And
I just know I have a very personal story of a guy I knew in a church I used to serve in another state. So I can kind of be a little bit more open, and they tithed. But goodness gracious, were they stingy? They were obsessed with money in a very unhealthy way. They were always critical of how the church spent the money and that's a whole nother lesson. When you think it's your money, even when you gave it to the Lord, you're still saying how you should spend it. Like that's a whole nother trust issue. So there's a way to give to manipulate the ministry and to where you say, I'm only going to give to the ministry I like, and you're going to do all of this. And I also grew up at another time in my life where the rich person was like floating the church and everybody knew it, and he was getting his way in every way. And that was really bad too. So there's a way to give and still not be at the heart of it. Yeah. And I think that's why Sunday we're saying it's about trusting the God of abundance. I think that helps cover a lot of those things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is the part I didn't share Sunday, and we'll do it now. Timestamp this. It makes it so much easier than to go back. So I was asking myself this question. Is Passion Creek Church preaching and living a gospel that the rich fool would feel no tension in? I think there are churches where that's the case, wouldn't you say? Like, oh yeah, so again, the rich fool is the guy who's essentially investing in, and these aren't evil in themselves, but it's like early retirement, fully funded, stock market just through the roof, and hoarding. Mm-hmm. I would hope, especially this series, this person would not be comfortable.
Yeah, I keep thinking about simplicity, and that wasn't comfortable for people, so I don't think so. I think, if anything, because of our natural bent, yours and mine, towards the poverty gospel, we have to be careful of the opposite.
Yeah. But I guess this whole thing isn't to pat our back. It is to be like, okay, where are we making sure we're honoring the Lord? And maybe even just ask in your own life. Okay, so then the next step in the quadrant of that sermon that was way too long, are we practicing generosity in such a way that the rich young ruler would be challenged, or would he just be celebrated? Because the rich young ruler looks great, has wealth, smart, successful in life. He'd be one of those guys where he'd be on the front of like all the Instagram posts, like, we got him at our church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we need those people in our church. Just honestly, I think there's a world where, the church, like, and I keep thinking of Jesus, the people that he critiqued about their greed was the Pharisees. At least as recorded in the Gospels. So I'm sure he critiqued other people, things like that. But his ministry was sustained by...
well, he definitely critiqued the rich young ruler.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But like his ministry was sustained also by very wealthy, generous people as well.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about a lot this next coming Sunday.
This Sunday. So, I think that's probably more of a temptation for me because I think what happens is...
but again, you're assuming this rich guy is generous. He's not generous at all.
Yeah, that's true.
He just looks like he's really religious, but really his heart is far from God.
Yeah, you're right. Then I don't trust him.
I was like, why do you want this guy?
I don't trust him.
And again, we want him to come and to learn and transform, and we'll be patient.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, we just have to. Hopefully, you hear the gospel in such a way and the truths of Scripture. You should feel tension here. Yeah. You always say that, like you like to say that our membership and
there's
party
a little
with the pastor. You should always feel tension.
There's going to be a little bit of tension with where we're trying to take how we're trying to follow Jesus is. He's self-sacrificing. Yeah, to go back to what you're saying, it's going to require sacrifice. So yeah, I think, I don't know why I assumed he was generous. I guess because I thought he was following all the law.
So my argument that I made yesterday, but it's too long so you didn't hear it.
Stop saying it was a good sermon.
No, you've never said that. I worked 40
That's
minutes
not
to
true.
get you to say that out loud.
Said you've preached good ones.
No, I know.
before.
This I look like a terrible human.
I look like a terrible
because
human.
I keep bringing that up. So listen though, what was my point? What was I even saying
I wasn't
at all?
listening. I don't know.
Oh, that was the point. Yeah, I don't think he kept those 5. I think Jesus
right.
just wasn't even arguing that. Like,
Right.
okay, let me get to the heart of the issue because I'm not going to go through this whole, well, in 3rd grade, did you still, that kind of thing. So I think he was self-deceived, which is what greed does.
Yeah.
It makes you, it blinds you to your spiritual condition.
Sure.
That's my theory.
That makes sense. Which again is a theory. Scripture doesn't say, but yeah, I think that's obviously likely. I mean, Romans 3, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
But also it's very likely this man not only fooled himself, he fooled everybody around him.
Yeah.
Like everybody in the crowd very likely would have been like, I think he kept all 5.
Isn't that after?
That's
I don't know
my working assumption.
Is it in Luke or Matthew? Or maybe it's in Mark. Is it after that the disciples are like, well, who can...
It's also Luke. If I would have kept reading.
Yeah, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich
preached
man
on
to
that.
enter. Yeah. And then the next... I listened. I
But then
heard
Peter
it.
says, and we gave up everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says to Peter, which is another thing you didn't touch on. I was wondering if you were going to get there. Addressing
Time.
The prosperity. I ran out of time, man. Jesus' response to Peter, isn't it? He says, I tell you the truth, anyone who gives father and mother, land, home, cattle, whatever, you'll get so much more in return.
Yeah.
And you've even started to get some already.
In the present age.
Yeah. So there's prosperity for you.
Yeah. We'll just, we'll rerun. We'll preach it again this Sunday. Are we so formed by generosity that the older brother, this isn't in a negative, could begin to lift his imagination to see that he can truly ask for a feast from his gracious father? So I think to the poverty gospel, we need to inspire their imagination and say, hey, Ephesians 3, he can do more than you can ask, think, or imagine.
Yeah, which is why it's great to share. Yeah, I love Mike and Grace's story again, which is this story of that God met their needs and they asked and God provided. And
I think the stories this Sunday we're going to share, based off some of the stories from the gospel patrons, will also maybe spur that imagination.
Yeah.
And then also a hard question I think every church should ask is, does our church honor or simply overlook the poor widow who gives out of her poverty? Because those 2 copper coins, those 2 little tiny coins, don't help with the building campaign. They don't help really that temple much at all. But this woman is amazingly generous, and God honors her and is the biggest giver in the room.
Yeah. So I think, what I take away from that is interesting. I think it's we have a responsibility to know our people, know the people that are in our church, not just what they give, but where that's coming from and what they're dealing with. Like more than just running the organization is also pastoring people where they're at. So if you know that this widow, like if you know her story and you know her life or whatever, if you have this person in your church, then you're a part of her life and you know like where that's coming from. You can gauge her heart well, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the other side is like, who does know? Because with the electronic age, it's not like we know who gives what.
Totally,
So
yeah.
like that story, I think that even hits more 50 years ago when you were passing around the bucket and you would literally see the cash that people were putting in or the pennies. Now it's not as much of a thing, but still like, I would just even say, you can, in today's world, you can tell usually if somebody's wealthier or really poor.
Mm-hmm.
And does the church, the wealthy person's here, or is everything okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then the poor person, like, yeah, whatever. It's like James 2 in real life.
Yeah, the whole how you dress in church. That was Paul's critique in what is it, 1 Corinthians, about not drawing attention to yourself to demonstrate your wealth, basically, is what he's getting at. So again, it goes back to the hierarchy. The church should be a place where the hierarchy is dissolved.
Right.
So
cool. Any other last things you want to bring up? Oh, let's answer the one question we got this week.
Okay.
And then I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah, this felt like a long one.
We're only at 39 minutes.
Just kidding.
We've been averaging like an hour. So I was asked, and here's my answer. Love to know your answer. Essentially, yesterday after church, somebody feels convicted and is appreciating this series, but then said, well, what do I do? Because these 2 things are a reality at the same time. I have a lot of debt, and so the scripture says don't be a slave to the lender. So do I get out of debt first and then I give? So I was talking to somebody else at our church also about this, and this person is quite frugal and budgets well. And so he said, well, I imagine maybe it'd be smart to just pay off the debt aggressively, all the while tallying up on your spreadsheet. I'm like, most people don't have a spreadsheet with their finances, sadly. You would keep remembering, you would keep saying, okay, I should have given 300 these 2 weeks. Instead, I put that 300 to my debt. So now when I get debt free, I'm going to give above and beyond 10% until I pay all that off. And so I'm just as aggressive with generosity until I'm even. So that's one. I wouldn't say to do that, but that is one. And I'm like, well, okay, whatever. I would say, yes, be fearful of being enslaved to the lender, which, full transparency, I still am. I mean, most people don't own their home at our age. So like I have a mortgage, but also just have some student loan debt. That's annoying. But we have decided as a family also, what I think is even more dangerous is being enslaved to mammon. So in my mind, what we have said, we will always give the first fruits. We're going to tithe right away and then be wise with our money and recognize we can't just live as if we're debt free. We need to also attack this debt as much as we can. Sadly, in my 20s, we had babies right. This part isn't sad. We had babies right away. So I didn't put paying off debt at a huge priority in my life. And so I kind of regret that. So there were some things that we did or some things that we bought or vacations we went on with family. I was like, like it probably would have been smarter to get rid of this debt instead of that. But I will never regret giving every step of the way. So I think giving is like an immediate obedience thing, and I don't want to delay that obedience. So those are my thoughts. Yes, you can be enslaved to the debtor, but also you can be enslaved to mammon. So I would say keep faithfully, slowly doing both.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of people would disagree, and there's room for that, and I get that.
Yeah, we are not giving financial advice.
Oh, yeah. Don't you get sued if you don't say that out loud? Allegedly.
I don't know. Allegedly, what I might do is this is not professional financial advice.
Thank you for that caveat.
We are not giving...
We are not financial advisors.
We have no background in any of that, so don't take this is pastoral advice. What I would say, and I'm not telling you to do this or not to do this, but I would again point back to last week, the big emphasis of last week, and I think we addressed this in one of the questions too, in the difference between giving time versus giving money is what we're after is your enslavement to greed. And so like I think there's a way to target that. So I think you should be wise and pay off debt to whatever level you are able to do and are advised to do by professional advisors or whatever. But at the same time, I think of again what my college pastor told me: if you're spending money, you can be giving money, and if you're in debt, you're still spending money, probably on things that are also not like necessary for your survival. Like you go to Starbucks every now and then or whatever. Like I think you can give a little bit. Just the practice of giving something, letting something go from your hands, can do a lot for your soul. And so I would say like be wise in how much you give. Talk to whatever your spouse, financial advisor, whatever, but don't neglect the just the act of like holding what you have with open hands and doing what you can. And like we said, I think there should be a little bit of sacrifice involved. So even if you're not in debt and you're practicing generosity, like that's still, you still hurt a little, like you're still sacrificing something. So
also the motivating factor, I just can't help but giving because I know what it does for people. I know what it does for the ministry. I know what it does to, expand the gospel. So that's the other side of it. I think we kind of forget like, hey, I want to be a part of this. I don't know how long I have to live. I want to be able to say I invested in heavenly treasures, not just earthly ones.
Which we're going to talk about more next week, right?
Lord willing.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yep. Stewards, not owners. So awesome. Well, you know what time it is. Time to land the plane. This was longer than my sermon, though. So
this was the most hostile podcast we've ever.
What do they comment? They're not really following that rule anymore, which means they're not going all the way to
the
end.
Did anyone say? I forgot about that.
We need to check on
our views.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our duration.
Yeah.
It's a miracle to have somebody listen to the full 45.
Yeah.
So comment hostile.
Comment miracle? No.
You pick hostile,
Hostile.
or miracle.
Let's do hostile.
All right, grace and peace, guys.